Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. I've been asked by a friend of this channel, a young friend, whom I thank for this opportunity, to film the episode about the death of the West in English as well. And I thought this is quite a nice opportunity because I've also done quite a few videos in English until now. And I thought, why not put up to speed the part of my audience which is not Romanian speaking. I hope there are still a few of these still watching my channel, even though I've switched to Romanian. So I'd like to send a big shout out to Awakening Richard, the Chinese podcaster in the United States who at some point was watching my episodes. I'd like also to take this opportunity to give a brief update about the situation in Romania to the non-Romanians on this channel, and to talk in general about the multipolar world that is upon us and whose advent was occasioned by the suicide of the West. As we can all observe these days, the West is committing suicide in a cultural, political, institutional, economic way. There are many aspects in which the collective West is eroding its own base. And unfortunately, even though we were brought up in this paradigm in which the West was the greatest civilization, unfortunately, this paradigm is slowly ending, and we must come to terms with it. In my opinion, we must start learning other languages, even though English is still the dominant international language. It will probably be overtaken in the next decades by other languages that are multipolar, that have their basis in larger numbers of, uh, of native speakers, such as Chinese. Just like I illustrate all my episodes with books, I'd like to use this opportunity to use this opportunity to illustrate this episode with Chinese grammar. I've done so far one semester of Mandarin Chinese, and I have some understanding of it. And with a textbook about the history of Spain, which they use for preparation for the baccalaureate. I think these two languages are the most are the best candidates to perhaps not to overcome English in terms of number of speakers, but at least to surpass it as the most studied languages for foreign language learners. So I would expect that most of Europe would switch to Spanish at some point in regards to the language that they teach in school as a first foreign language. Because English, frankly speaking, not only will it no longer be the hegemonic language around the world, but also in Europe, in the European Union, there are no countries that have it as a main language. So there are two countries in the European Union that have it as a second official language. That's Malta and Ireland. But most of them have as a first language, as a first official language, as national language, a different language. So in the case of Malta, it is Maltese, an Arabic language written with the Latin alphabet. And in the case of Ireland, it is Irish, which is a Celtic language. So with Brexit, our continent no longer has a country that has English as a main language, and if Europe were to become a sovereign agent, sovereign geopolitical agent, then replacing English would be one of the most important things to do. Of course, Spain is not the most important country in the European Union. France and Germany are, but Spanish is the most spoken European language in the world as a native language. So even though English surpasses it in terms of a number of total speakers, Spanish is the European language that most people around the world have as a native language. Therefore, the best candidate for an international language that Europe would learn is Spanish. It is also one of the languages of the of the United Nations, if this institution were to still exist. Anyway, and Chinese because China is the number one economy of the world, and it will probably cement that base. It will probably strengthen its position. There are no contenders to surpass it. So the United States is slowly eroding, and China has surpassed the United States in 2016 in terms of GDP at purchasing power parity. Therefore, if I were to bet on two languages, it would be these two. Of course, in the case of Romania, being in Southeast Europe, perhaps Turkish and Russian would also be good candidates. But overall, these would be my two choices of multipolar languages to learn. And regarding the suicide of the West, I hope this is still on. Yes, it is. Good. In terms of the suicide of the West, um, we can all see that the United States has turned against its former allies. The United States is basically cannibalizing other NATO countries, taking their territories by force. Not only is it killing international law with its invasion of Venezuela and its kidnapping of its president, but all of these interventions that have never had the approval of the Security Council were all illegal, and the United States has been eroding international law at least since the 1990s, at least since its unipolar moment. So we've had a gradual erosion of the international law by the United States in the last decades and by Israel. And this is why in the past years, when the discussion was about Russia and China and international propaganda machine run by the West was calling for these countries to respect the rules-based international order. It was not about international law, because international law was not being respected by the very hegemon, by the very epicenter of this rules-based order, being the United States. It was a call to basically just respect Western dictates and to respect Western rule. This is what the international rules-based order was. But even that is being cannibalized by Donald Trump, because these countries, these Western European countries, went along with all the foreign interventions of the United States. The last time that European countries opposed American imperialism was in 2003, when the United States were invading Iraq under phony pretenses. And it is then that the leaders of Germany and France, Gerhard Schröder and Jacques Chirac, opposed the American intervention. But since then, the Europeans played along with Libya, with Syria, with Iran, with all the regime change operations, with the war in Ukraine. So it is a bit hypocritical of them to come and say that they do not agree Donald Trump's take of Greenland. They are a bit late to cautioning against American imperialism after 2 decades of just piggybacking on it, of just supporting the United States wherever it went, and of contributing, as France did in Libya, contributing to these interventions, to these illegal interventions. So this is basically the last stage of Western decadence, the last stage of the decay of empire, in which the hegemon turns against its vassals and cannibalizes its vassals. First, the Americans did that economically against the Europeans, with the sabotage of Nord Stream, with tariffs on European economy, with how Biden named it the Inflation Reduction Act, which was actually a way to subsidize European companies to move to the United States, and so on. And after decades of American sabotage in Europe, now the masks have fallen, and the United States is basically sabotaging Europe without any other pretenses. The United States simply appeals the law of the stronger party. So not the right of the force, but the force, the naked, basically exhibiting naked force towards its vassals. And of course, the European Union is also not a geopolitical actor yet, and it is also not something that uh, can be favored without any subsequent questions, without any doubts. Because even though we are part of this organization, we are part of this community, this organism is starting to be more and more totalitarian in its own right. And it's not just the pandemic that showed this, with the implementation of the Green Pass, first as travel document and then conditioning everyday life to it. It's not just this, but there are many examples in which the European Union as an organization is turning more and more totalitarian. And I would give the example of these sanctions. Uh, the past anti-Russian sanctions have also included European citizens, which is quite shocking, I think. There are people who live in the European Union who are European citizens and who have been sanctioned as if they were living in Russia and as if they were Russian oligarchs or something like this. So the assets of everyday people have been frozen, and these people are no longer allowed to work in Europe and to derive any kind of income. It is notorious the case of Jacques Beau, but even more tragic is the case of Hussein Dogru in Germany, who documented the Palestinian case and who has been sanctioned under the anti-Russian packages, even though he is a European citizen. He lives in Europe and he had nothing to do with Russia. He was a pro-Palestinian activist. He was a journalist documenting the pro-Palestinian protests in Germany and interviewing various Palestinian leaders from occupied Palestine. So the European Union is essentially using these foreign policy tools like sanctions to sanction internal dissent. So how can I agree with Federal Europe, which is the new project that the European elites are proposing for us, when I see that the European Commission is operating in such an arbitrary manner and there is no more rule of law? Unfortunately, these sanctions that European citizens have to live under uh, cannot be appealed in a court of law. They were not carried out through a court of law. They were just executive acts. They were decisions of the European Commission ratified by the Council of Ministers, Foreign Ministers of the European Union. They did not come through a legal process and they cannot be challenged in a court of law. They can be challenged in various courts like the European Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights, which is, by the way, not a European Union institution, but an institution of the defunct Council of Europe. But it is not exactly certain that favorable decisions can be obtained through this route, because, from what I understand, uh, the European Court of Justice can only examine the formal aspects of the case, not the substantive aspects of it. So they can only examine if the claim of the commission regarding the identification of the person and their occupation is correct, but they cannot they cannot deliberate whether or not the person is an agent of Russia or whatever, because the European Commission did not um, did not accuse these people of committing crimes. What they did is not illegal and it was not sanctioned by a court. Uh, in their own words, in the words of the European Commission, what it is doing, it is trying to change behavior and it is nudging basically these people who have not committed a crime, and therefore a court of law cannot absolve them, cannot acquit them of something that they were not accused of in the first place. This is the dystopian aspect of it. if these people were to have received criminal sentences, they would have been in prison and they would have at least received free food and free accommodation. But in their case, it is even worse. They have to pay rent. They are only allowed 560 euros of their own money, of the money that's been frozen, and they have to pay rent and live for a whole month from this amount. They have to apply every month to the national bank of the state that they live in. So the Bundesbank in the case of Hussein Dobru, and the Federal Bank of Belgium, I guess, in the case of Jacques Beau. And they can only get this monthly allowance. Their accounts are frozen. They cannot be serviced by any European company. They cannot have accounts in euros anywhere. They cannot receive payments. They cannot make payments. So somebody has to pay their rent on their behalf if they need to wire money through a bank, and so on and so forth. So they are under a level of sanctions, which is actually worse than a criminal penalty. But this was decided by the foreign ministers of the European Union, and there is no legal appeal. Given that these people were not convicted of a crime, they were not heard. They did not have the chance to be heard by a court, and they do not have the chance of an appeal. So therefore, they have been convicted with a harsher penalty than it would have been the case if they had been imprisoned. So this is the state of the European Union right now, and this is why I'm not optimistic regarding the West in general, not only regarding the United States. We have now this conflict between Brussels and Washington, but I do not see any of these two parties, as being the favorable one. So whereas the United States is, of course, behaving in an imperialistic way, and unfortunately, the Romanian opposition sees this as a way of freeing ourselves from Brussels and of maintaining some sort of rule of law, which Brussels destroyed. But this is only an illusion, because the Americans, unfortunately, are now just demolishing any kind of international law and anything that countries can claim in their defense against a stronger party. Donald Trump is even making his own United Nations or something like this, Council of Peace. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's supposed to be some sort of international body, which probably some countries will vote for in the UN. So it will become an international organization, and it is chaired permanently by Donald Trump and by whoever will succeed him in the American presidential seat. And the tax to become the membership fee to become a permanent member is $1 billion. Of course, it is ridiculous. It is not something that can supplant the United Nations. It is not something that can lead to the multipolar world order. It is just the latest attempt by the United States to maintain its grip on world power, and it frankly decredibilizes it as an international actor, because the United States was also part of the American order after 1945. Its headquarters is in New York. The Americans have done this multiple times. When they don't like a country, they do not issue visas to its head of state and to its diplomats to attend UN sessions. They freeze the accounts of the embassies in the United States that can make such visits happen. So, not to mention that the United States has issued unilateral sanctions to a lot of countries, which are also illegal under international law. So the world order that Donald Trump is burying, it is actually also made by the United States, and it is also functioning in the interest of the United States. There's nothing multipolar about the United Nations yet. China and Russia being probably the two most important multipolar countries have 2 seats in the Security Council, but so do Britain and France. which are nobodies essentially in the international arena. So India does not have a seat, Brazil does not have a seat, but Britain has a seat, or France. It makes no sense. Therefore, it is true that the United Nations is a defunct organization. It is true that it has no teeth to impose, to enforce any kind of international order. But what Trump is trying to make, and this is America's last stand, will also not lead anywhere in terms of multipolarity. So probably BRICS will be the organization, the multipolar organization around which the new world order will be built. BRICS, or in case Donald Trump and in case the United States actually enforce their newly found Monroe Doctrine, then probably Brazil and the rest of the Latin American countries will no longer be able to align themselves with Russia and China. And then the organization that will create the multipolar world will be the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of which also India, Iran are members. So it's kind of like the continental Asian BRICS, Eurasian because Belarus is also a member. So yeah, dire times to be living in. The multipolar world order is trying to be born, but the unipolar world order has not yet died, and we are in the in the agony process. And unfortunately, in Romania, there is no vision regarding multipolarity because ever since 1990, ever since the revolution and the fall of socialism, we have been bombarded by American mass culture, by American pop culture, by the American opinion sphere. So Romanian elites can no longer think outside the lens of the United States. We were all groomed to be Atlanticists, and it's hard for us to develop a way of looking at the world which is not influenced by the American news outlets, by the American opinion magazines, and so on. We are a generation that has taken up American mass culture to be their own. And it's very hard to create multipolarity when you don't have people who understand what Russia is, who speak Russian, who don't understand what China is, who don't speak Chinese, who don't understand the Middle East, except for the interests of Israel, and so on. So it's very hard to look for solutions here in Romania when most people, even those who think of themselves and who describe themselves as being sovereigntists, can only look to the United States. So basically, the Romanian political arena is divided between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans claim to be the sovereigntists because they mistakenly saw that Donald Trump is being a sovereigntist in his own country. So therefore, they believe that by obeying Trump and by being Trump's vassals, they are sovereigntists. They are being sovereign. Of course, sovereignty is not built in this way. It's not a matter of being somebody's weasel. This is not being sovereign. Being sovereign is to take your uh, to make your own decisions and to create your own foreign policy, to create your own alliances, to create your own economic system. So yeah, it's hard for people in Romania who are basically either English speaking or speakers of other European languages to imagine the world in any other way but the Western way. And unfortunately, this Western way, it's not just the United States, but the entire West that has been prominent on the world stage for at least 500 years. This entire Western world is collapsing, and there's nothing that we can put in its stead, at least now. Perhaps a subsequent generation of elites on this continent will be able to treat uh, Asian countries and African countries and Latin American countries in a different manner, not be vassals of the United States. And then perhaps Europe will also be able to be its own pillar of multipolarity, to be its own pillar in the multipolar world. But right now, Europe doesn't have a chance to reorient itself towards Russia or China or towards the BRICS because its elites and its institutions are built to be vassals of the United States. What Ursula von der Leyen is saying, and what some European federalists are saying, is that this is the moment when Europe can become independent of the US. But I highly doubt it. The United States is occupying Western Europe with tens of thousands of soldiers. Basically, what the USSR was doing to Eastern Europe under the Treaty of Warsaw, the United States is doing to Western Europe under the Treaty of the North Atlantic. But if the Warsaw Pact dismembered after 1990, the same did not happen to NATO, and the American grip on Western Europe became even stronger. Therefore, these countries, which are vassals of the United States, which do not have their own military means, they do not have their own technological means, not their own, even their own informational means to counteract US hegemony, these countries have no chance of becoming autonomous if Washington doesn't want to let them. So this is why I'm overall pessimistic regarding the future of the West. I do not see that Europe is becoming an alternative to the United States. I see both entities collapsing at the same time. And of course, Europe is collapsing stronger because it also chose this path of confrontation with Russia, and the United States has way more leverage. It can still cannibalize its allies, whereas the fate of the Europeans can only be that of being cannibalized. It has no vassals to cannibalize in its own stead. The European countries are losing whatever remnants of colonies they still hold. So Denmark is losing Greenland, but also France lost most of its influence in Africa. Actually, one of these people that are sanctioned by the European Union, Nathalie Yamb, is a Cameroonian activist that has Swiss citizenship, and it was sanctioned by the European Union under the anti-Russian sanctions package for promoting independence from France. So from promoting for promoting the sovereignization of Niger, of Burkina Faso, of Gabon, of these countries that were subservient to France in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, this is the predicament that we are under. There are no Western solutions to the problem. In my opinion, the only solution can be individual. Learn Chinese, learn Spanish. I can show you some other languages to learn around here, but I would bet uh, I would bet on these two for the coming decades. And this is what I wanted to tell you. As always, if you like what I do, please like, share, subscribe. And if you want to support me, you'll find the description. You'll find the link in the description of the channel. Maybe I'll do some more videos in some other languages as well. Maybe I'll do one in Spanish in the future. So thanks a lot for following my channel, for following my work, and see you soon. Bye bye.